Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seek to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm your host, Liz Busby. I teach writing at BYU and study the intersection of religion and science fiction and fantasy, and I'm a Latter-day Saint. And with me today is my co-host, Carl.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carl Cranny. I have a PhD in religion, and I like to write on the intersection of religious themes in pop culture. And I also am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And we have two wonderful guests with us today. We have Chanel. Will you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Chanel Earl. I am a writer of fiction and essays, and I currently teach writing at BYU.
And then we also have Jill with us.
Hello, I'm Jill Terry Rudy. I am a folklorist and the Nan Osmond Grass Professor of English at BYU, and I study folk narrative and media.
And these are two wonderful people for us to have on because they're both experts in the area we're going to talk about, which is Cinderella adaptations. So we're going to have a great time talking about everything Cinderella in the media, and it's going to be a blast. But first, we are going to do our best book segment where we can each recommend one thing that we're watching, reading, or listening to. My recommendation today is a book called The Just City by Jo Walton. I am in the target demographic for this book. I don't know how many other people are. It begins with the god Apollo and the goddess Athene talking about why do humans have individual significance? And Athene's like, oh, I've got this idea to run Plato's Republic, and you can be incarnated as a human in it and see what it's like. So she takes all the philosophers who've ever been interested in Plato's Republic and have prayed to her to be part of the Republic and whisks them back in time to Atlantis before it explodes, and they set up Plato's Republic. With some robots that she steals from the future. So we've got our fantasy, we've got our sci-fi, and we have our philosophy experiment, and of course, everything begins to go wrong. So if you like philosophy and Greek mythology and moral dilemmas and deep philosophical questions in your fiction, this is a really fun book for you. And that's The Just City by Jo Walton. Carl, what have you got for us today?
All right, I'm going to do something a little different. It's not something I'm currently watching, reading, or listening to because the things that I'm currently engaged in are either super political, very rated R, or things that I've already recommended because I haven't finished the series yet. So I'm going to go back to a series that I already read and recommend the Divine Cities trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. It's a fascinating series of books about a world where magic exists and the gods exist and sort of takes place in a world after somebody learned how to kill the gods. It takes place like 100 years after that. And what's fun about it is the three books all have very different thesis statements. They're about very different things. The first one's sort of about history and the way we constructed and the way it affects our lives that we don't quite understand as we sort of unravel what really happened when this upstart slave learned to create technology that could kill gods, and what sort of led to that and how it ended up reshaping the past and the current future and all that sort of mixed up, and what really happened, and just sort of unraveling that. Sort of a whodunit, but like whodunit 100 years ago with history. The second one is sort of about the nature of war and whether it's a good thing or not. And the third sort of gets into some interesting concepts of what it means to be divine and how, because spoiler alert, not all the gods are really dead. So there are three very different books set in the same universe with some of the same characters, but just have very different sort of approaches and subject matters, even though they're all fantasy. So the Divine Cities trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett is my recommendation today.
Awesome. I really need to pick that one up. It sounds amazing. Okay, Chanel, what's your recommendation?
Oh, I couldn't really just pick one. I have to talk about two, but I'll talk about them quick. First, I just finished a nonfiction book that I thought was amazing. It's called How to Know a Person by David Brooks. And I feel like I've been looking for this book for years. It's all about how to get to know the people in your life and how to listen and how to be a better friend and how to understand people who think differently than you. And it just felt like it was wonderful. It was humbling, but wonderful. And the second one is a television show that I want everybody to see. It is probably for adults only. It has some violence, but this is on Peacock, and it's called Mrs. Davis. And it's this bonkers premise where a nun is assigned by an AI who kind of controls the world to find the Holy Grail. And at the same time, she's given the assignment, maybe by Christ, maybe by Mary. You'll have to watch it and decide for yourself. She's given the assignment to destroy this AI. And she goes on this adventure across the world to try to find the Holy Grail and try to destroy the AI. And everything that happens is very strange. It has a bit of a feel like Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. Maybe like if the Umbrella Academy wasn't as dark and punk. I don't know. It's kind of crazy, but it's just a really weird Christian sci-fi feel. And I thought it was delightful.
I need to get back to that.
That is one that is on our list, actually, sort of things we might do in the future. I've started it, and this seems really interesting to me.
Okay, and finally, Jill, what have you got to recommend to us?
I just have one book that I am currently reading called The White Mosque by Sophia Samatar. It's a memoir, and it's a pilgrimage of Mennonites to Uzbekistan to find the place of a community that went there after they were driven out of Russia. So as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I recognize some of the themes and the impulses of being where your ancestors were and trying to understand their lives that were very difficult. Samatar is an English professor and a creative writer, and I love her sentences.
Yeah, I just finished her novella, which I think won the Hugo this year. The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain.
Yes.
That one was amazing. Yeah, and the language, and just she has a real sense for getting religion into her sci-fi fantasy, which we love as well. I liked The White Mosque as well. We will have links to all of these recommendations on our website, popcultureapricottree.com. And if you buy through these links, that helps us support the podcast so we can keep bringing you these conversations about the true and the beautiful in pop culture. And now on to our main discussion about Cinderella adaptations. So I think we have to start where we start with a lot of our compilation episodes with why Cinderella? Why are there so many Cinderella retellings? What makes it such a popular subject for adaptations?
I've been thinking about this a lot because I thought I was going to have a really easy book to write about the different versions of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. And there's so much more to it, to go back to the tale collection versions of Cinderella and then just to understand the different media versions of that Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. So as I have viewed a lot of versions and stories, I find the issue of mistreatment and how people can subtly hold someone else down through meanness as an interesting feature of the story, that it's often portrayed as a story of romance, but there's loss, there's hope. And I have looked at issues of what I call aggressive superiority of her family members and overcoming that, either as people who have been put down by others, or we probably all need to admit that at times we've been that person. I think that part of the story is something that resonates, but also it has those great motifs where you do have a helper, and often they're kind of magical. Or it might be your family member, like often the tree is representative of the mother who has died. And then also you get the beautiful objects of the dress, the glass slipper. And then the ending is often very memorable as well, where she may or may not appear standing on the top of a staircase and be admired by all. Her sisters may get to come along to the wedding eventually, or they may have their eyes pecked out by the birds as they come out of the chapel. And I think some of those motifs and the visual aspects have made it very adaptable into a variety of visual media.
I think those are some really good insights on why we love the story so much. I think the mistreatment fits along with one of the thoughts I had, because I don't know why everybody likes the story. I just know why I like the story. I think Cinderella is one of my very favorite fairy tales. And part of the reason I think is this idea that she's so mistreated, she's brought so low, and then because she's good, she wins in the end and rises up so high, right? It's this rags to riches, but the way she gets it isn't through like trading stocks or any kind of modern way. The way that she gets her rich lovely, happy ending is through being kind to everyone around her. And I love that idea. I want that in the world. I want people who are really kind and work really hard to be the people that win and the people who come into power. And so it's this fantasy that, hopefully not too big of a fantasy, this idea that by being good, by being kind, by treating the people who mistreat you well, you can win in the end. I've always really loved that idea.
Well, I think it's a very Christian idea. I think that you could really look at Cinderella, as I've thought about this since I knew this question was going to come up. Cinderella is kind of a Christ figure in that sense, in that she doesn't descend below all things and is the savior of the universe, but because of her innate goodness under these very trying circumstances, in the end, she receives her just reward. It's that phrase from the Doctrine and Covenants when the Lord's talking about, many are called but few are chosen, and he talks about the people who follow the commandments of the priesthood and these things, eventually their dominion comes to them without compulsion. It says without compulsory means their dominion shall flow unto them forever and ever. If you are a good and a nice and a kind person, in the long run, that will work out for you. And I don't think we believe that is true necessarily in this life, but it certainly is true for Cinderella. And so we love that story. She's kind of a Christ figure in that way, if I may be so bold as to state something like that. Because yeah, she is mistreated terribly. Usually it's because she's a good person that all these things eventually happen to her. And we'd like to believe the universe works that way, and I think it does in the long run. But that's why we have these stories for even those who don't have a fairy godmother to show up. They can think that maybe there will be something eventually that will come to them, and you should be a good person anyway, despite these trying times you may find yourself in.
Iona and Peter Opie, who have specialized in children's literature like nursery rhymes and fairy tales, and their classic fairy tales, in either their introduction or the headnote to Cinderella, they have a very Christ figure reading of Cinderella, and they call Cinderella the most popular fairy tale in the world. So that's pretty good company to back up your nudge that that's part of what's going on with the story.
I think it's really interesting, though, because if you look at all the different adaptations, in some of them, I would say definitely Cinderella's a Christ figure. In others, I would say definitely she's an us figure and the fairy godmother is a Christ figure, right? So it kind of depends on your reading. And another reason I think this fairy tale is adapted so often is because of its versatility. I mean, there's modern versions where the glass slipper is a sneaker. There's versions that are diverse in so many different ways, and the sisters have different personalities, and the stepmothers have different personalities, and Cinderella does different things, and it could be adapted to lots of different meanings.
With the Cat Cinderella version from Bossuet centuries ago, she commits murder. So you're right to remind us that there are lots of versions and there's a lot of different Cinderellas. I think that possibility of the change, but something still recognizable in the story, that's part of why we love it too.
Thinking of one of my favorites, and this is not a media version, but I love Ella Enchanted because it makes it this meditation on free will and do we get to choose what we do and the power of making your own choices instead of just obeying all the time because she has to obey. And it's a totally different experience than your typical Cinderella, which is she obeys because she's a good person. It's like, oh, I obey because I have to. And now the powerful choice is to not obey eventually and break the spell. It's really, really interesting.
It's such a good version.
Not the movie.
I love the movie. I think the movie is so good. It's totally different, but it's great in its own way. And I think that's interesting that we can have this book that's based on a fairy tale, and then we have a movie that's based on a book, and you can recognize they're all the same, but they're all so different from each other. Some people don't like one or the other of them.
We had to explain that distinction to my daughter. Her friend today came over and was like, hey, the new Wicked is coming out soon. And Susan said, really? And we had to explain to Eliza that the Wicked is based on The Wizard of Oz, and then it's based off of this next book that is fan fiction of The Wizard of Oz, which then got turned into a Broadway play, which got turned into a movie. So we keep moving further from the source material at each step, and yet people still seem to enjoy all these different versions of it. Although I have to record as saying, not the book for me.
On Wicked, yeah.
Yeah, 2 books in my life I have stopped reading and did not finish, and that is one of them. And I almost want to go hate read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion just so I can make Wicked the only one that I've never finished.
But that author also wrote a Cinderella adaptation because he wrote Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister. So,
Yes, he did. And there's a Wonderful World of Disney version of Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister that has really rich production values and is pretty fun to watch.
I had no idea that it had been adapted.
I haven't been able to finish the book either of that one.
She's just kind of an off-putting writer, and I don't know why. Because apparently they make wonderful adaptations. So
You should link that Ugly Stepsister one on your page so I can go find it and read that one too. Or watch the movie. It sounds like watching the movie is the better
I
experience.
think you can find it on YouTube, but it's not streaming. I keep waiting for Disney Plus to stream it.
You should link all the different adaptations we're going to talk about in the show notes. People be like, "Ooh, I want to go see this one," so they can just find it.
So I'm going to spend an hour Googling where you can stream all of these. It's going to be fun. It is. This is the content that you're here for. So I do find it interesting, this process of like the continual adaptation and re-adaptation of Cinderella. It's a very folklore-y thing that we have all these different versions. Carl, you were showing us before we started recording your wife's pile of picture books of Cinderella. And I remember having a collection of those myself as a kid. Like, I'm very fond of the Egyptian Cinderella picture book. Like, I love that one. It's interesting that we continue to do that with our media. Like, we're still adapting and readapting Cinderella, just in a different way. It's no longer folklore being passed along. It's a folklore-esque thing where we're involving big media companies and trying to make a bunch of money by retelling these stories in different and interesting ways.
Yeah. It is my wife's favorite fairy tale. And so when I told her we were doing this one, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, she immediately sent me an email about all the different versions she's seen and what she likes and what she didn't like about it. And I actually at one point was talking to her about this, and I surreptitiously recorded her so that we can if we can find a place to stick the audio into the podcast so you could get a little bit of Susan's input. She's got a big collection, and so she had many thoughts.
She sounds like my kind of person. When I was a kid, we used to have Cinderella Saturdays, and my siblings said I would watch like 4 or 5 adaptations in a day.
Wow.
And we'd watch as many as we could find. So I actually have a spreadsheet. I shared it with Liz that has all the adaptations across the top and all the different tropes across the left. And it talks about how every different film adaptation deals with each trope. It's a fun fairy tale, and I can see why she would have so many adaptations.
Liz, where do you find these people? You're like, let's do one on Cinderella. Oh, and I've got someone who's got a literal spreadsheet of all the movie adaptations.
You know, I find the best people. That's what it is. So I do have a question on the subject of fairy tale adaptations. 2 years ago at the AML conference, we had a presentation by Kirsti Christensen, who works at the BYU Library, talking about whether Mormon authors are particularly drawn to doing fairy tale retellings. Is this a genre that we really like as Latter-day Saints, and why? Some of the biggest name examples that come to mind, like, of course, Shannon Hale kind of made her career doing The Goose Girl and the sequels that are all adaptations of lesser-known fairy tales. Orson Scott Card even has a fairy tale adaptation of a Sleeping Beauty combined with Baba Yaga, which is my favorite, called Enchantment. Jessica Day George has several fairy tale adaptations, and I know there's lots of self-published and independent authors in the LDS space doing fairy tale retellings. And I wonder if we have any thoughts on, like, is there a reason we're particularly drawn to it, or is this just us participating in a thing that culture loves in general?
It can be both. I mean, this is almost a question you would want to ask, I think, Chris Blythe. We live in, as Latter-day Saints, such a magical world where angels can show up and sometimes there are magic rocks. We live in a fantastical world, and so I think a lot of the fairy tale tropes and sort of the world that they inhabit come very naturally to us. I can see why we would be drawn to those kinds of stories. Also, that a lot of the fairy tales are, of course, moral stories, trying to teach you how to be a good person. Don't do this or you'll get eaten by a witch, whatever. Get your eyes pecked out by ravens, take your pick. If you're a good person, you'll triumph and marry the prince at the end, or be a princess in my case, obviously, but whatever. We like both the moral aspect and sort of the educational aspect of fairy tale storytelling. And also that we, as believers in the divine who has come to earth recently and in multiple interesting sort of non-standard Western ways, I think we resonate with that a lot.
But I don't think Latter-day Saints have a monopoly on this perspective, because other faiths also believe in miracles, also believe in doctrines like redemption, which is something we see in a lot of fairy tales. But we do believe in the second coming. We believe in the miracles of Christ. We believe in the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, right? And these kind of things are so miraculous, like Carl was saying, that it makes miracles in fairy stories more meaningful to us. And it makes them representational, I think, for the kind of miracles we're seeking in our lives. They kind of stand in for those miracles. When I get to the end of Snow White and I see Snow White wake up from eating a poison apple, wake up from the dead, and kind of be resurrected and restored, and then go to a new kingdom where she gets to be a princess in the new kingdom, like that has serious meaning to me because of my religious beliefs. And I think that applies to a lot of different religions, but I definitely think it applies to us as a culture. I have recently written a series of essays about fairy tales and atonement that kind of illustrates some of the ways that the endings of fairy tales and the lessons in fairy tales can teach us about atonement. It's being published in Wayfarer magazine right now, and they have 5 essays out. And that's kind of the thesis of the series, is that we can learn a lot of religious lessons from studying fairy stories, and we can see parallels between the way the fairy stories talk about miracle and life and death and resurrection and the way that we believe those things happen.
This has reminded me a lot, and I think you quote this in your introductory essay to that collection. Tolkien, of course, and the way he saw fairy stories. He was very against like the very twee for children fairy stories that went on in the Victorian era. But he was very much in favor of the miracle, the eucatastrophe, the good catastrophe at the end of the fairy tale, where something that seems impossible happens. Like in Cinderella, where this fairy godmother shows up and then, oh no, she's lost the prince anyway. And then there's basically a miracle that she's able to try on the glass slipper and find him again. And so this impossibility, that leap of hope rather than catastrophe and tragedy, is definitely a very Christian impulse that is one reason we love fairy tales.
Absolutely. I love that word eucatastrophe. And one of the things he says about it is that it's a joyous turn that you could never count on to reoccur. Like it's something you didn't expect and you don't expect it twice. But when it happens, it lifts our spirits and it helps us see the miracles that Christ brings to our lives, which I think is a really important lesson, is a really neat observation that Tolkien made that we can then learn from. I actually met that essay taking a class from Jill Rudy.
Me too.
So, because she teaches fairy tale classes and she had signed us to read that. And I was so grateful because now I've gone on to study fairy stories, based on what I read in Tolkien's essay.
Say part of what tales get us and stories. Years ago, I attended a conference that was mostly fairy tale scholars. It was called Thinking with Stories in Times of Conflict. And I love the first word because these types of stories are good to think with. We might think, oh, there's this tidy moral at the end, but there's so much going on along the way that it's good for thinking. It's got the magical, the wonderful, the awe. Marina Warner, her last trait of fairy tales is that optimism. And to combine the thinking and the hard things, she says that they need not continue. I think that's part of the draw, and that's why we do them in so many ways. It's fun, too.
It's really fun.
It is really fun.
It makes that hard thinking maybe a little more enjoyable, too.
I really like that idea of stories as thinking. When we think about even just reading the scriptures, most of the scriptures is in stories. There's some bits of it that are like theology going on, but most of it is stories. And so when we're doing scripture study, what we're doing is thinking in stories. And so maybe that's just a task that also feels very familiar to us, that like we're using this story, we're thinking through what could it mean? What are the different bits of meaning I could get out of it? And I think of how similar sometimes fairy tale adaptations feel to me to scriptural adaptations. Like when people take a scripture story and turn it into a novel or a longer length thing, like it feels like it's doing very similar things. This work of thinking like, how could this actually work? How would Nephi have done this? And how can I make this make sense? And you see similar things when we do adaptations of fairy tales into longer stories. Like, okay, how can we make the logic make sense here? How can we adapt this Cinderella story into a story about a cyborg in Cinder, right? So we've got all of these different ways to play with that story by rewriting it and retelling it and exploring how it stays the same and how it's different and how that changes how we think about what it's talking about. I love it. So we have all watched many, many Cinderellas. So the plan here is to just start going around and let's talk about some of these Cinderella adaptations and what's interesting about them, what's different in the way that they've adapted the story. So I can go first. One very core childhood memory that I have is going to our local library and checking out Shelley Duvall's Fairy Tale Theater on VHS. So last night I was like, I wonder if you can stream those anywhere, and you can. They are all on YouTube. And lo and behold, there is a Cinderella episode. But it is pretty wild. So you can find this on YouTube. It stars Matthew Broderick as the prince, which I was like, interesting choice. Such an interesting blend of like slapstick and over-the-top ridiculous humor in the parts that are with the stepmother and the ugly stepsisters. There's a scene where after the father has died, the stepmother's like, okay, enough grief, let's hand out the chore list. And the cleaning and cooking will all be done by Cinderella. And daughters, your job is to wear beautiful clothing and make sure that you stay attractive. And Cinderella, it would be really good if you could also, and she goes on dividing up these chores, and it's just like over the top ridiculousness. But then when you get to the ball, it's very much trying to deal with the difficulty we have of the trope of, oh, they met at the ball one night and now they are madly in love and destined for each other. So there are multiple balls that she goes to, and they spend time getting to know each other and talking. And it's much more of a acceptable romance to our current sensibility of what romance should be. So it's an interesting mashup. And then at the end, speaking of punishments, stepmother and stepsisters get turned into rabbits. But it's okay because the fairy godmother's magic always wears off at midnight. So they'll only be rabbits for a day. So they back off on it a little bit. It was a fascinating look and just very nostalgic for me to go back to fairy tale theater. I don't know if any of you watched those.
I watched them with my kids.
I watched them with my parents. So, we're the same in that way. But I don't remember the Cinderella version. But when you were describing the kind of absurdity and kind of slapstick comedy in it, it reminded me a lot of one of the ones that I wanted to talk about, which I'm looking at your notes, and it looks like you said it came out in, did you say, when did you say it came out?
Are you thinking of the Muppets one?
Well, the Muppets one came out in 1969. So I think it's a predecessor to the Fairy Tale Theater version.
Okay.
And it has a really similar feel. It's like completely absurd. And everything in it is wild and slapstick. And the frogs aren't invited to the ball because the king hates Kermit. And the stepmother is a human, but the stepsisters are Muppets. And of course, they're hilarious. And it's just a really wild, absurdist take on Cinderella, where you can tell they were having so much fun with it. And I love that. And I imagine, now I want to go watch the Fairy Tale Theater version. I imagine it feels very similar. It's also made for TV in the same way, and it's less than an hour long. So they might even have a similar length and feel.
It was nice watching a movie that was less than an hour. I was like, why did we stop doing this? This is great. Why do all movies have to be 3 hours nowadays?
I've never heard of the rabbits before. Jill, have you ever read a written version that has the sisters get turned into rabbits? Because they must have gotten that somewhere.
No, I don't remember that.
The fairy godmother suggests like something worse that she's going to turn him into. And Cinderella's so nice. She's like, oh, don't do that. And she's like, okay, then like furry mammals of some kind. So it's like it's Cinderella's being kind and stepping it down. So at least they're not bugs or whatever. They're rabbits and they're cute.
Your complaint about all movies being 3 hours long were partially what made me really interested to watch the 1957 Rodgers and Hammerstein version, which you can find on YouTube. Although I was reading a little bit about it, I think the version on YouTube is like the dress rehearsal, but it's just delightful and it's only 80 minutes long. And part of that is because it was live TV. And this is just a thing that we don't have anymore. I cannot think of a TV show or any sort of live presentation that has done a story from the past little while. Maybe one of you will. I do know there was one episode of The West Wing where they had a debate between two of the characters, and that was live TV. But it's just not something we really do anymore. And to watch the choreography and the directing and the switching between cameras and the different people singing as they went and just the costume changes, which they had to do really fast, was just an astonishing piece of art. Not to mention that, of course, anything with Julie Andrews in it is just by definition amazing. But this was really, the version on YouTube has a little introduction by, like 75-year-old Julie Andrews whenever they published the DVD that they now put on YouTube. It was like the #1 show in America, like the show that most people in America had ever watched for a couple of decades after the event, because it was just so popular. It's just an astonishing piece of art that we don't do anymore, because now if we want to see a play, we can just go to a play. Or actually, you can just go watch Hamilton on Disney Plus, right? This live theater through the medium of television is not something that we do anymore on a regular basis. And so to see that art form at maybe arguably its peak was just delightful for me. And I've talked mostly about just how astonishing a work it is to have produced something like this. But as far as the adaptation itself, it was mostly by the numbers, and it's fun to have a musical version of it. And that lends itself to a certain sort of mythical quality to it, like a further layer of fairy tale on top, where everybody spontaneously bursts into song all of the time. And that makes it very fun and enjoyable to watch. And so the 1957 one, and it's only 80 minutes. It's on YouTube, guys. You can just go watch it. I really enjoyed that version of it.
I think Disney tried to bring this live musical thing back a couple of years back. Like, I remember they're doing like live production of Peter Pan, and I don't remember what other musicals, but there were a couple of years where it was like a Christmas or Thanksgiving thing.
Yes, they may have started, or Sound of Music was one of them.
Yes.
And it caught on, but by the time they got to Peter Pan, it was like, watch party in the comments. Let's kind of tear this thing apart as it's happening before our eyes, because there were always sort of glitches or just other choices that people might have made. But it was very interactive, and it was showing that maybe network TV almost could remain relevant. So they did them for 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row, and then it went away. But it could come back again. Watching that 1957 version is when I thought, because the opening scene, Cinderella is marching down a stair, because their set was very, very narrow. And so when you talk about like the dance and the aesthetics, they were accomplishing a lot in a really small studio. And so they come up some stairs and then they go down some stairs, and the sisters are in their nice clothes, and she's walking behind them carrying these big packages. And I thought, how does someone make somebody do that? It wasn't physical. And so that led me to study relational aggression and just how people can control other people by putting them down and just making them feel lesser. With the 1997 version, which starred Brandy and Whitney Houston and Whoopi Goldberg, and a very multiracial cast, I talk about microaggressions, and with where you can put down a whole group of people by not showing them so much on national television, and how having a Black Cinderella was a great important commentary for a lot of people that happened. But then you can see how some of the major newspapers, when they review it, they say, this is not a performance for the ages. Even the press sort of tried to put it down, but here it's had its 25th anniversary. People still watch it and love it. There was great rejoicing when it came back on Disney Plus streaming. There's social component when it hits the media level that can draw people together, but it also can show where some of the cracks are in how we treat each other. And that's actually that line from President Nelson's Peacemakers Needed conference talk. That really guided how I thought about what I was seeing, was how we treat each other really matters. To me, that sentence is not judgmental. It's just, it's true. And look around you and see how it plays out. And I think that's kind of what, to me, this story invites us to do. That's what stories give us, the beginning, middle, and the end.
I think that's so fascinating. I just finished Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, his recent book about what's going on with the youths. An interesting part in that book is when he talks about relational aggression, and especially with girls and social media. he talks about how if we count relational and emotional and social aggression, girls are way more aggressive than boys. They're much more likely to act out against people they know. And so maybe that's why we have so much fun with Cinderella and like the hamming up of the stepsisters and the stepmother just like really trashing on her, because every woman has experienced that, right, in their life, in their social life at school when they're young. We all experience that kind of purposeful exclusion or the, oh, I'm going to be your friend. No, I'm not. Psych. I can't believe you believed that I was going to be your friend. Kind of aggression that goes on. And that's why we have so much fun playing with that part of the Cinderella story. And then we transition into the romance phase.
Don't be sexist. That happens to boys too, especially ones that are super short, like me, but you know.
Okay, but boys are much more likely to also just like go at it with their fists.
No, it's true. And then we become friends after.
And then go play video games together.
That's right. I made a lot of friends in elementary school by getting in fights with them and then being best buds. It's interesting that you point out a lot of the dynamics, and I think it's true though. A lot of the dynamics are more, if I don't, maybe I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, are more maybe stereotypically female. These things, men are also excluded too, but the fact that it's a stepmother and stepsisters, and Cinderella is also a stepsister to the other two, just creates an interesting gendered dynamic that I don't know if there are any adaptations that have ever flipped any of that.
Oh, yes, there are.
Okay, Chanel, you take it away.
Jerry Lewis starred in
Oh, Cinderella.
Cinderella. Edwin was his fairy godmother. And it's a fascinating adaptation. Because it still has the same elements of he has two wicked stepbrothers who are pushing him down, trying to take his inheritance, right? And the prince is now a really rich princess from overseas who comes and visits. But it is a great movie. Cinderella is a fun one. It has some weird songs and some interesting things in Jerry Lewis's classic humor. But it is really an interesting, gender flip version. I don't think it's done very often, though. When I think about it, that's the only one I can think of.
In the pro version that most of these are based on, the father is definitely there. The stepmother and her father sort of disappear, and the focus is on the relationship with the sisters. But over time, we often get the stepmother back in. The father disappears in most of the versions, and that really is intriguing to me. I really, really wonder how that happens.
This is one of the points that Susan made to me when we were discussing it, is that the dynamics really shift if the father is still alive. Is the stepmother just so overbearing and controlling that she rules the roost? Is he like an absent merchant? Has he died? That shifts the interpersonal dynamic of Cinderella's household in interesting ways that Susan finds rather enjoyable. But yeah, most of the adaptations of late, the father is dead. It's not possible for him to be part of the story at all. It's not a dynamic that exists. He just passed on, and we just sort of have to deal with this reality that we now have to face, that the stepmother is in charge as the oldest adult in the family, and with all that sort of comes with that.
I am thinking of the one adaptation I know where the father is a significant role is Ever After, where we've got this interaction between the young Cinderella and her father, who is a merchant who's gone away a lot of the time until he dies, but that he is the one who trains Ella to be someone who is smart, who reads, who solves problems in a different way than just looking for someone rich to marry, which is the stepmother strategy. So that's the only one I can think of where we've got a really strong role for the father. And he's in the movie for quite a while.
And Ella Enchanted, isn't he more the merchant type?
Yeah.
I think in the movie he's there, but I don't remember in the book.
I don't remember. It's been too long.
Yeah, in the movie he's a merchant type who's absent a lot, but he isn't dead like in a lot of the other ones. Well, and it's interesting to me that even in Cinderella, where they've flipped everything, it's still a wicked stepmother and the father is dead. They didn't flip that. I guess they decided we don't want to have a wicked stepfather, we'll have a wicked stepmother still.
Yeah, I think an abusive father looks very different than an abusive stepmother, and it's not exactly what the story's about.
It really changes the dynamic.
I have another adaptation I'd love to share. This is a new one. It came out in 2018, and it was made, from what I can tell, partly by members of our church because it stars Paris Warner, who was the lead in Once I Was a Beehive, And Tanner Gilman is in it. He has been in the Studio C cast. And it's called Not Cinderella's Type. And one of the things that really surprised me about this one is that it feels modern in a way that none of the other, even like the 2021 Amazon Prime version that's trying to be really modern, you know, even a lot of these modern versions that I see don't feel as modern as this one, because in this one, the prince does exactly what we would do now. He calls CPS on her stepmother, and or it's really her aunt and uncle who are taking care of her. And I just thought it was a really refreshing modern take that still manages to keep some of the same like romance of the story, although it doesn't have any magic. I just think it's one that deserves a little more attention because it was a really fun, surprising adaptation that was just really unique. I had never seen anything like it.
Well, I'm happy to rip apart the 2021 Amazon one if people want me to get into that one.
Oh, my children will join you. They did not like that one.
Oh my gosh. So there's so many problems with that. There are some themes from our modern sensibilities that I think adapt well into different fairy tale stories. Fight the patriarchy, I don't think fits very well into Cinderella. And that's what this 2021 was. All the men in this movie are basically buffoons, or kind of like Liz, how you sometimes point out, a lot of the movies today are about the parents who don't understand things and the kids sort of lead them along. In this movie, the men don't understand anything and the women always lead them along. And Cinderella, she doesn't want to be the queen. She wants to be a dressmaker, and the prince doesn't want to be the prince. So he's just going to follow her around the world, I guess, and do, it's not quite clear what, by the end of the movie, what he's going to do. Because it just so happens that the prince's little sister, who's really into, like, economics and why are we paying the catapult people so much money to make catapults? That just helps the catapult market. There's all the sorts of coincidences that I don't think actually map onto the tropes of Cinderella very well. And so I think that's an interesting idea. They should have picked a different fairy tale, because to me, the thing that I found the most aggravating about this one is that there was no sense of duty from the male side. We have the king, played by Pierce Brosnan, Mr. James Bond himself, who is just a jerk. Like, the only way you can have duty or obligation that you have to fulfill is to be a raging, narcissistic jerk to everybody. And that is not what duty means. It is not what obligation means. So I think, really, this version, we have a lot of patriarchy, and that is bad. But this one just flipped it and made it matriarchy, and that is also just as bad. Like, the fact is, and you'll notice in the church, we never use the word patriarchy. We use the word patriarchal, as in the patriarchal order, as in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their wives with whom God has made this covenant, right? It's the men and women together that I think really is where we should be. For more on that, you can watch our episode about the Barbie movie, where we sort of hit a lot of these sort of themes as well, and discussed the nature of what is a good, healthy dynamic between men and women. And this movie did not display that even a little bit. And so the 2021 Amazon Prime version, there's some good songs in there. Who knew that What a Man could juxtapose with Seven Nation Army so well? But that doesn't redeem the rest of the movie, which I thought was relatively atrocious, except for, as Susan pointed out again, the costumes. The set, all of that was wonderfully done, but Susan hasn't ever forced herself to watch this one because she can just tell she's not going to like it, and my summary of the movie to her did not help that project along.
I do think it's interesting when we get a more fully fleshed out prince character in some of these adaptations. One of the parts that I like about the Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella is all those songs that we get from the prince's perspective. He feels more like a real person rather than a prize. We like to do that with the princess characters. We say, oh, this person should not be a reward that you receive. And Cinderella has that opposite dynamic where the prince is just like Cinderella's ticket out of this horribly abusive family. Especially in the Brandy one, how they give him this character of, I want to fulfill my duty, but like what he's conflicted about fulfilling that duty. And we see through all these songs who he is as a person. And similarly in Ever After, like that relationship between them feels like there's something really going on there, and that they're both real people who want to make this relationship work rather than a fairy tale trope, which, that's also nice too. But
But in the Disney animated, which is probably the most famous version ever,
Mm.
he's literally named Prince Charming.
Charming.
Like he doesn't have a character trait beyond Prince and Charming, right? Tall, dark, and handsome. And I do think the ones you've mentioned, Ever After and Rodgers and Hammerstein, the prince actually gets to be a real character. And one of the other ones that I wanted to talk about, I think actually the prince becomes the main character, and that's The Slipper and the Rose.
Before you get into that one,
Yeah.
sorry, can I just
No,
finish
say it.
one final thought on the 2021 one that I think encapsulates sort of what Liz was just talking about and what you're picking up on, Chanel. There is a line, I even wrote this down, when the prince and Cinderella finally get together and they realize that this should work, whatever else, even though I think it's very unhealthy in some ways. But he says in the scene where they're at the ball, she's like, no, if this is a choice, I choose me. And then she walks out, and then the clock strikes 12 and all that sort of shenanigans happen. And I was like, that is just so weirdly like inward looking, narcissistic, not quite selfish because but like no obligation to anybody else. It's very expressive individualism, right? I'm going to do my dressmaking thing and nobody can tell me what to do with my life. I just want to be a dressmaker and that's what I'm going to do, hell or high water. But when the prince catches up to her, he says, choosing us. No, he says, choosing me is choosing us. And I was like, oh, you were so close. Because I think that the real dynamic there is choosing us is choosing me. Like having this relationship with this woman that I love and who is smart and intelligent and has these desires and things like that will be good for me because I choose to be in this partnership. But he said the line wrong. He said choosing me is choosing us. I'm like, no, you're still centering it on yourself. When you center it on the two of you, the pair, the combination you are making, the marriage, dare I say, that's what makes it a good moment. And they almost had it. Anyway, so I just wanted to crib off that Liz's sort of comments there real quick before we jump into it. But Slipper and the Rose is Susan's favorite, so go ahead, Shinhao.
Oh, man. Well, but I want to say, it seems like the 2021 version that you're talking about, one thing it does get right is the prince does have his own personality, and Cinderella has her own personality. His personality isn't the strong, the princely personality we might think of. But that does seem like one thing. I didn't love that movie for lots of different reasons, but I feel like that is one thing that they started doing was giving the prince some character traits.
Right. His character trait in this movie is, I don't know what to do with my life, which isn't a character trait. Like he never.
Yeah, he doesn't have any desires except for he falls in love with her.
Yeah, he feels like a very shallow character. And again, this is why the whole movie felt so matriarchal to me, because the women are fully fleshed and developed characters a lot more than the men are. And it's like the invert, what's the feminist trope? The two women have to have a conversation about something.
The Bechdel test. It's the reverse Bechdel test.
Right. Yes, it fails the reverse Bechdel test, and that is its own problem. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that.
I'm just going to also
We're going to get a lot of hate because the people are like, of course the man hated the one that's anti-patriarchy, but it's a bad movie, you guys. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It does give visibility to some groups that haven't been seen before, and I think that's one thing that
What
it
they were
accomplishes
trying to
as
do.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I
With
thought
the
the Brandy
casting.
one did a better job because it's just so clearly multiracial. Like, what is the queen is Whoopi Goldberg and the king is Victor Garber and they have an Asian son. Like, okay,
Filipinos, yes.
yeah,
Well,
but it just leans fully into that, and that is what it is.
But Carl, you mentioned the scene, which was my favorite scene in the 2021, where they sing Seven Nation Army and What a Man, and looking at those princesses and seeing for the first time in my life a bald princess that was gorgeous really had an impact on me. I was like, you can be a princess even if you don't have hair. Like, I actually had a little emotional reaction to that because those princesses were so diverse. It was like every color, every height, every weight. It was just like really, I thought, a lovely scene.
I actually thought that lady looked very nice as well.
It was pretty cool. And I think The Slipper and the Rose, one of my very favorites ever, but it might take it a little too far. Richard Chamberlain is the prince, and he's an amazing prince, and he gets more songs than Cinderella gets, and he's fully fleshed out. And if you've ever wanted a prince that was fully fleshed out and had some real, like, dynamic character, you know, like fun to watch, I think it's the one for you because he's just delightful. And then the princess is kind and she's good and she's beautiful and humble and everything you want from a Cinderella. And she, you know, has the same happy ending we all love. I just think that's another delightful adaptation. I don't know, Liz and Jill, if you've seen that one, or Carl, you've probably been forced to watch it several times if it's Susan's favorite.
Susan has threatened me to. She has not yet followed through on it. So
Ooh. Date
Oh,
night.
you
will
should watch it.
I will date night. I will return and report for our next podcast. How about that?
Well, I'll say I have made my husband watch it, and he did not hate it. He also didn't love it. So you take it, you know, for what it is.
There you go. We haven't really talked about the Disney Cinderella one. It was not one of my favorites growing up, but that's because I grew up during the Disney Renaissance, and obviously Belle and Mulan were the best. So Cinderella has a hard time fitting in with them because she comes from an era, I mean, it's 1950, right? Snow White and Cinderella are both very domestic princesses, and it just did not click with me as a child of the 90s. It was never one of my favorite movies, but you gotta love the mice. Like, the mice are great. And like the dress assembling scene is cool. Like, that song is fun.
Well, and
just
I
love
will
the
say,
fact that
as
they named their cat Lucifer.
as a 60s child, I grew up with the Leslie Ann Warren version of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. And I think because of the Disney version, I liked having a real person. I liked being able to see a Cinderella who reminded me of my cousin. And so my mom really loves the Disney Cinderella. That's her favorite. And so it maybe could be generational. But I appreciated the having a live action princess too.
So
Was our
I
own.
was a child when the Brandy Rogers and Hammerstein one came out on TV, and I remember our whole extended family gathered to watch it. It was an event. But I kind of felt like I was betraying the 1965 Leslie Ann Warren one because that's what I grew up with on VHS and like recorded off of TV, and I watched that thing a lot. And so, like, I always had conflicted feelings because that's the one that I love, but, like, the Brandy one is such better production values and, like,
Yep.
singing voices and better casting and, like, all these things. But yeah, there is something to be said for, like, the version of Cinderella that you experience as a child has a special place in your heart.
Yes, I agree.
What do we think of the 2015 live-action Disney remake of Cinderella?
Oh, man.
I
love
forgot
it.
that.
I thought it was just wonderful.
It's one of the few live action remakes that gets universal praise from people. I mean, and maybe that's just the low bar of the Disney remakes. That, like, it's better by that standard that they, like, actually had something to update, and maybe it's because they had something to update, right? With The Lion King, with Beauty and the Beast, it's just a shot-for-shot remake most of the time, and it's not better. But they changed Cinderella so much because they had to update it because it's, 50, 60 years later, and it just doesn't fit the way we told the story in the 50s, doesn't fit our culture. And so it had to change a lot to be a good story, and it justified doing a remake.
They gave the prince a name and some character traits, which was good. They played it really straight. They weren't trying to make it modern. They were trying to make it feel really classic. I think that really was part of why it was enjoyable. I don't know.
And they keep her sweet, right? She's still
Yes.
very humble and very good, and the message is still kindness and will win everything. And it doesn't try to, like, do any real girl power kind of thing with it.
Yeah, that was why I enjoyed it, because she is portrayed as just a genuinely good human person for whom all of these things should, all these good things should happen to her. The You catastrophe is completely earned in that movie. And so, yeah, I like that. So I like your term, Liz, classic. They tried to update it, but to make it a little more well-rounded, but universal at the same time. They didn't try to completely reinvent the wheel, but just retell this story in a really good way. And it worked.
Okay. Do we have any other adaptations we haven't touched that anyone wants to touch or say anything, or we can close it off?
Bill, you had a couple written on yours that were older that I would love to hear about.
They are very old. So Liz is an 1899. He was a magician. He became a filmmaker, and so he's doing special effects. It's very cut down, but you get some things that don't happen in other versions. Where in the ballroom scene, she misses leaving at the right time, and so she is revealed in her shabbiness in front of everybody. And I don't know another version that does that, and it really emphasizes time. There's some things with the clock where Millie himself is kind of the clock keeper that is really interesting to think about. And then connection with other ways of dramatically telling fairy tales. It ends with a little ballet and a tableau. And so we're kind of between the media, and it's interesting. Lottie Reiniger does a silhouette animation where she cuts paper, and then shot by shot, she changes to make the animation. So it's all black and white images. Hers is the Grimm version. It's amazing what she can do with when the sisters cut their feet. I had to close my eyes because it's kind of graphic. And so that it is the Grimm version, and just the technique, the artistry. They probably were silent films, and there's some different on YouTube. You can see some people have added music. Someone composed music recently to go along with it. And then there's a Vangelis version for those of us who love Chariots of Fire. It's really, the music is very different from the images. So yeah, I would suggest looking at those. You should be able to find them on YouTube.
I have just looked them both up on YouTube, and those look astonishing. And they're both short, too.
Actually, they're short.
And they're so
God.
early in the history of filmmaking. That's crazy.
Yeah. And to see what they could do then is really kind of a humbling reminder that we aren't as clever as we might think we are. People have always been clever. I think that's isn't that part of what fairy tales remind us, that people have always been in trouble and people have always been clever and sought help to get out of the trouble.
Love it.
And it's surprising that there aren't more versions of the Grimm brothers Cinderella out there. Liz and I were talking about it the other day. We can only think of one modern version, which is Into the Woods. Yes. Into the Woods does that version, but it's combined with a lot of other fairy tales. You're going to get 4 or 5 at the same time if you watch that movie.
Yes. And there we go, with some fascinating princes as well.
Very fascinating princes.
They definitely...
Yeah,
they get their own character traits.
They get their own character traits, yes.
Just not the ones you want from a charming prince, right?
Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Such a great movie.
And it's also interesting that, like, this first version you shared from 1899, so that's like 126 years ago. So we've been watching Cinderella movies for as long as movies have existed. Like, they made them then, and they made one probably last year that we didn't talk about, right? Like, Cinderella is always being remade, which is just, I don't know, a testament to how much we love it and how good of a story it is.
Yeah. Today,
that's a great note to
recording,
end on.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say we're recording on September 9th, so that means film adaptations of Cinderella predate President Nelson. So happy birthday, President Nelson, at 101. But yeah, when you put that in the show notes, Jill, I was like, 1890, is this a book that she's recommending? That's not quite our jam. And I'm like, nope, It's a movie, Earl. Anyway,
It's cool.
but this paper cutout one just looks astonishing. Like we're
Yes.
gonna close up and then I'm gonna go watch it. Might go watch it with Susan.
And you can in
Yeah.
14 minutes or less.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, so I'm curious to see like if they have different. There's like a playlist version that has all the different. Anyway, I'll be curious to see like what the music is differently. Anyway,
Yes.
All right. Well, Chanel, we want to promote, of course, your Wayfair series. So tell people what that's about, where they can find it.
You can find it on Wayfair on Substack, on wayfairmagazine.org. They have a tab at the top that says Atonement and Fairy Stories. If you click there, you should get links to all 5 of the essays that are out so far, and 3 more essays are coming out before the end of the year. Cinderella is not on the list, but I talk about Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, a bunch of other fairy tales you might not have read, like Goblin Market, The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde, Tamlin, and just some fun fairy tales that are really great and have a lot to teach us.
Yeah, I'll testify that the Beauty and the Beast essay absolutely blew my mind. I did not think of so many possible ways to interpret this fairy tale. Like, excellent work. I highly encourage everybody to figure out how to get access to that and read those because they're amazing.
And I think right now they're free to read. At least some of them are going to be free to read even if you don't subscribe. And then after a few months, they'll all be free, I'm sure. So
Fantastic. Fantastic. So Jill, where can people find out more about your work with fairy tales?
I don't have much of an online presence, but I have some books that may be accessible through public libraries. Channeling Wonders about fairy tales on television, Rutledge's Companion to Media and Fairy Tale Cultures. We have a database of fairy tales on television, fttv.byu.edu, that sometimes is up and running. And this will give us more impetus to make sure that it is. So you could check that out.
Fantastic. Carl, where can people find you nowadays?
I'm still on Threads at Carl Cranny if you'd like to get in touch.
And you can follow my writing and book reviews at lizbusby.com. Thanks for joining us this week. If you enjoyed this episode, share the podcast with a friend who enjoys Cinderella movies and good conversation. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice or on YouTube. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode via email or social media or on our website. It makes our day when we get to hear from you guys and know that someone is out there listening to us. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. We'll see you next time.